Hi, today I'm going to speak to you about why coherent breathing has the capacity to increase heart rate variability more than any other breathing technique. Now, this video presupposes that you have a deep physiological understanding of heart rate variability. So if you haven't watched my video on that, I really suggest that you go and listen to that first and then come back here because I'm going to be relying on some of that foundational knowledge and not explaining it all. So, what is coherent breathing? Coherent breathing is simply inhaling for a count of 6 and exhaling for a count of 6. So that means one breath cycle is 12 seconds. If we divide 60 by 12, we get 5. So it is 5 breaths per minute with an even inhale and even exhale. Some will say coherent breathing is 5 inhale, 5 exhale, meaning 6 breaths per minute. To be honest, to get the highest level of heart rate variability for you individually, it's probably somewhere in between. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be focusing on inhale of 6, exhale of 6. So now down to physiology, because to understand why coherent breathing has this dramatic effect, we need quite a lot of different physiological information. I'm going to provide pieces and then I'll thread them together. So let's start with intrathoracic pressure. So that's simply the pressure within your thoracic region. And for our intents and purposes, think of it the amount of room that you have within the lung region. So if you inhale, we can do this together. Go ahead, inhale. There is a lifting of the chest, the intercostal muscles, the ribs splay out, and the lungs, which are attached to those regions, also expand, right? That is elastic material within the lungs. Now, if we are inhaling, we're creating that space, intrathoracic pressure goes down. So we might have the same amount of air, but more space for it to be in. So it has less pressure. And by the way, this happens with diaphragmatic breathing. I am not, just to show you, engaging actively in chesty breathing. I'm breathing with my diaphragm, but of course the chest is going to expand as well. Okay, now let's move to the circulatory system. So oxygen-rich blood is pumped out of the left ventricle through the arteries, and it goes and it diffuses all of the cells with oxygen. And the blood also picks up carbon dioxide. This oxygen-poor blood and carbon dioxide rich blood is called venous blood. It's in the veins and it needs to travel back to the heart. Venous blood doesn't have that strong mechanism like arterial blood to be pumped out to parts of the body. So instead, in order for it to move up, there is a little bit of a valve system that prevents backflow. Movement also helps the blood to go up, which is why it's so important that we're walking around and not sedentary throughout the day. Otherwise, we do have a pooling of our blood in the lower part of our body, and we can have edema. And then there is this other mechanism, which is the gradient difference between intrathoracic pressure and the pressure within the veins. Now, this is minor, but it does cause some of that venous blood to be brought up, that the pressure is greater within the blood in the veins than it is within the thoracic region. Also, the active breathing is sort of a little bit like suction. So there's a bit of the pulling of blood up. Now, this is particularly prominent when the inhalation is long. It allows more time for the blood to come up, and also a longer breath usually will cause the thoracic region to open more. So there is even less pressure. So the mechanism is going to be stronger. Okay. So venous blood rises up more when we are inhaling more slowly. And as a result of that, we actually have a little bit more blood that arrives at the heart. And where does it arrive first? At the right atria, right? This oxygen poor blood. Then it goes down the right ventricle. It goes through the pulmonary artery into the lungs. And there it releases its carbon dioxide. It picks up oxygen that goes through the pulmonary vein, that goes into the left atrium, down the left ventricle, that gets pumped out of the left ventricle into the aorta and through the arterial system. Okay, it's just a bit of review of the cardiovascular flow. Now, once again, when we're inhaling long, which we would be with a count of 6, a little bit more blood will arrive at the right atria. We would say that's more preload because essentially it's going to load the right atria with more blood. And that increased level of blood, which is not a huge amount, but enough to affect processes, will go all the way through that system to the left atria and then to the left ventricle where it's loaded more. And when it pumps out, there is an increase in what's called stroke volume. That's simply the amount of blood, the volume of blood that is pumped out. Okay. So once again, that long inhalation leads to this whole process of a little bit more blood being in the left ventricle and being pumped out. And where does it go next? It goes to the aorta, or what we call often the aortic arch. Okay. Now we're going to go to another piece of physiology. Within the aortic arch, we have pressure receptors, or we call them more clinically or technically baroreceptors. Baro means pressure in Latin. And they pick up the slight level of stretch that happens every time the left ventricle is pumping out blood, right? Now, if the left ventricle pumps out more blood, there's going to be more stretch. Okay. Keep that in mind. In order to modulate and monitor blood pressure, we have a mechanism called the baroreflex. So we're moving to something else now, right? I've just kind of put the pieces together again. The long breath draws the venous blood up. We have more preload. That preload comes all the way to the left ventricle to the aorta, and the aorta is going to be stretched just a little bit more than general on the pump, and that's going to be picked up by pressure receptors, the baroreceptors. Okay. Now, most of us know that blood pressure is not stagnant. It's changing throughout the day, but what you may not be aware of is that it changes moment by moment, right? When we are pumping out the blood, pressure is higher, and when we're not, pressure is lower. And there are also mechanisms that are actively working towards lowering the blood pressure moment by moment. Most notably, the baroreflex. So the baroreflex, it's not just picking up information from the aortic arch, but for the purposes of this video, that's all that we're going to focus on. It picks up the information from the aortic arch. The level of stretch activates those receptors, and they trigger one of the branches, an efferent branch going from body to brain of the vagus nerve. And that branch travels to a very well-known nucleus in the brainstem, the nucleus tractus solitarius, the NTS. And actually a lot of somatosensory information goes there. So the NTS. From the NTS, that information is then sent to another nuclei within the brainstem, the nucleus ambiguus, which we discussed in the other video, particularly in relationship to the exhalation, right? So the information about The increased stretch, the baroreceptors is sent up the vagus to the NTS, and then that's sent to the nucleus ambiguous. And what happens next is that the nucleus ambiguous will increase the firing of frequency down the vagus to the sinoatrial node of the heart, slowing down the heart rate, which reduces blood pressure. And that's not because blood pressure is high. It's just a mechanism because blood pressure is lifting and we need to bring it down, lifting and we need to bring it down. And it will go down naturally just because we're not pumping out blood. But this is an added level of mechanism and maybe even protection. Now, every 6 to 7 seconds, the baroreceptors are picking up what goes on in the aorta, regardless of whether or not it's being stretched more. And that's something to note in relationship to this rate, right? That's happening every 6 to 7 seconds. In addition to that frequency loop, when there is a stronger stretch within the aorta, which we might have when we breathe in for a count of 6, that will also activate the baroreceptors. And that information will be sent up again to the NTS, to the nucleus ambiguous. And because that is a stronger stretch, sending more information, the descending input from the vagus to the sinoatrial node might actually be a little bit greater to lower the heart rate more. Okay, now we're moving back to the inhalation. So in this long inhalation, it's interesting to note that the process of beginning to draw the air into the nose all the way to the point of the blood stretching the aortic arch, right, through increased stroke volume, takes about 4.5 seconds. So then what's going on? Because we're still breathing in, right? In that other 1.5 seconds, this is what happens. That information, like I just said, is being sent from the baroreceptors up the vagus to the NTS to the nucleus ambiguous. That's the extra 1.5 seconds, okay? And then at the end of that 6-second point, when we exhale, that is when the information is being sent by the baroreceptor mechanism to the heart. And it's coinciding with respiratory sinus arrhythmia, wherein whenever we exhale, we increase the signaling from the nucleus ambiguous down the vagus nerve to the sinoatrial node of the heart, reducing the heart rate. So essentially what occurs is that we have the increased level of information being sent down the vagus to slow down the heart through the baroreflex, and also information being sent down the vagus to the heart as a result of respiratory sinus arrhythmia, the exhalation. And those things pair together, they come into coherence, hence the name, and they lead to a significant reduction in heart rate, which we would not otherwise see. And why is the 6 seconds of exhalation important? Because of that looping of the baroreflex every 6 seconds, picking up that information. So if we don't do 6 seconds, get back to the next inhalation, we will miss that frequency. Now, also from my last video, you will remember that the sympathetic nerves are also sending information to the sinoatrial node of the heart. And they don't really quicken the heart rate. They send slower information than the vagus. They just kind of keep it at the same rate. But when you have all of that descending information to the to the sinoatrial node through both of these pathways, the lowering is greater. So let's say without that input from the vagus, the rate is 90. right? The heart rate, 90 beats per minute. And then with the respiratory sinus arrhythmia, it goes down to 70 if we have a long exhalation. When we pair that also with the effect of the baroreflex, maybe it goes down to almost 50. So what we see is this huge variation leading to this big flexibility that through regular practice of coherent breathing can support not just heart rate variability, but nervous system flexibility and all of the benefits associated therein. Okay. You may want to watch this again because there are a lot of mechanisms here that I talked about. Intrathoracic pressure, the suction of the venous blood up towards the heart, preload, the pressure receptors in the aorta, the baroreflex lining up with respiratory sinus arrhythmia functioning, and also the process of the 6 seconds of starting the inhalation to the pumping into the aorta, and the other 1.5 seconds going up from the nucleus tractaris to the nucleus ambiguous, a lot. But you can listen as many times as you want because this is a recording. And now I want to take you through an embodied practice of this. So we have some of the knowledge of why it works, but now it's important to feel it. So you can remain seated if you are seated listening to this. You can remain lying down if you're lying down. The way that I was taught coherent breathing by my mentors, Dr. Patricia Gerbarg and Dr. Richard Brown, was to lie on my back with the knees bent and the calves, these are the calves here, resting on a chair or sofa. And it was really important that the back was not lifted off the ground. So that chair doesn't, we don't want it to be that high, right? So we can easily at the bend have our calves resting, and also a little bit of a pillow, something thin underneath the lowest part of the low back or the sacrum, and possibly even something under the upper back and something a little higher under the head. But that is based upon levels of comfort. If you have long COVID, by the way, it's really important that you have that slight level of elevation. Right now, I'm not going to get into the physiology. That's another lecture or discussion. So choose your position and listen to me as I provide you some additional directions, or you can just listen and then get into position. So I'm going to cue you to slow down your breath, inhaling, exhaling, and then I'm going to actually play a recording of piano scales that go up and down, going in one direction up for 6 seconds, and then going down the other direction for 6 seconds, cueing the inhale and the exhale. To benefit from this practice, it is crucial that you do not try to inhale longer than you comfortably can. If you can comfortably inhale for a count of 3, do so. Don't breathe again, just wait. Wait till the scales go in the opposite direction and then exhale. And if you can't exhale all the way to the scales going down, wait. And then in a few seconds, again, the scales will go up the other direction. If you force breathing, you apply pressure to the respiratory tract, to the muscles recruited to move, the lungs and the thorax. And so you're not going to gain the benefit. And the other reality is the ability to inhale for that length and exhale for that length is based upon the development of your respiratory, cardiovascular, and autonomic nervous system. So they need time. And they need time to work together, or what we call to entrain. If we try to force that, we're not going to gain the benefit. Instead, through continuous practice of coherent breathing at a rate that is comfortable for you, we gain that cultivation, that development in these different physiological systems and how they interact. One more piece of information. It is not crucial that you synchronize your breath with the scales exactly, even if you have the possibility to inhale and exhale at that length. Just do the best you can. And over time, synchronization will happen maybe in this practice or if you do this in general. And for those of you that do a lot of breath work and think, oh, I can inhale much longer, I can exhale much longer. Okay, wonderful. But to gain the benefits of the increased heart rate variability, it's this rate that's going to have the greatest impact. So without further ado, if you're not in your position already, get into your position. And I'm going to start to count down the breaths, and then I'm going to play the scales for about 10 minutes. I always play them for at least 7 the first time. And at that point, you can continue to breathe in this way, or you can turn off the video, whatever works for you. Inhaling, 1, 2. Exhaling, 1, 2. Please breathe through your nose in and out, not your mouth. Inhaling, 1, 2. Exhaling, 1, 2. Inhaling, 1, 2, 3. Exhaling, 1, 2, 3. Inhaling, 1, 2, 3. Exhaling, 1, 2, 3. Inhaling, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhaling, 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhaling, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhaling, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now the scales.
Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale.
Just notice how you feel. Be conscious of your breath. Take as long as you would like to get up and practice. I recommend that if you want the benefits of this, that you do practice 10 minutes a day. And if you can practice twice a day for 10 minutes, that's fantastic. This is something where practicing for a longer period of time will benefit you more than lots of little bits throughout the day. That increase in heart rate variability through more and more time, more and more minutes, allows changes to occur within the physiological systems, some that are hypothesized, some that are known. But if you are comfortable and not overwhelmed by doing 25 minutes, and maybe you want to build up to that, the rewards psychophysiologically can be significant. Let me know if you want to have any other videos on respiratory physiology or physiology in general that relate to yoga practices, and I will do my best to offer that. Thank you.